story of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden. A beautiful, peaceful place where God places Adam, all the animals, and then creates him a wife. There's only one stipulation. Do not eat from the tree in the middle of the garden. We all know the story. Is this historic fact, or is this story, like many others found in both of the Bibles, simply a myth placed to teach you some kind of lesson? Now, you can look back through the Bible and find many stories, and you can match them up like the Noah thing. We'll get into that in another show. But this particular one, it's very difficult to really match it up perfectly. But if you look at some of the older gods going back thousands of years, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, you will find very similar traits, things that happen to them and that are happening to Adam and Eve. Pay close attention. Welcome to Myth Monsters. Before we get started, I feel we need to first ask the question, why are there two creation stories in the Old Testament Bible? Most, or everyone, can recite, in the beginning. God creates everything, the light, the sun, the moon, the earth, animals, and mankind. He then rests on the seventh day. God is done, and it was good. Now there are several things wrong with that story, but we are not going to explore that in this episode. Now, once God created the world, the area the Bible always references the world is mostly the Near Eastern area. Those areas were far from hospitable to newly created humans who suddenly appeared with no knowledge of anything. It would have been a very dangerous place. Perhaps that is why we have a second creation story. Did God realize his folly and decide to start over? Many scholars, though, believe the Garden of Eden was the first creation story. Then, why is it not the first in the Bible? There are many issues with this story, from start to finish, and together, we are going to expose several. When I begin to discuss the parallels between the Adam and Eve story and the ancient myths related to prior civilizations and the gods they believed in, as do you yours if you are one of those who believe the story is true, let me begin by stating there are irrefutable parallels between the stories in the Bible and nearly identical stories from prehistory, such as the story of Noah. I have to at least open the door to your mind and show you that if several other stories can be directly referenced from other civilizations, their gods, and their stories, then please understand that the writers of these stories were obviously borrowing and nearly plagiarizing from other myths. Now, I attempt to be unbiased with my research, which is difficult because I already know, just from reason, logic, and science, that these stories aren't true. And I'll ask you to please do the same. Just listen to the end and make up your own mind. What exactly is a myth? Most people use the word meaning a falsehood based on some story that has been continually elaborated. Scholars and others have several definitions or theories which fall under comparative mythology. There are 5 separate beliefs or theories about how myths get created.
A Sumerian simply believes or claims the myths are actually distorted accounts of historical events. These stories are elaborated on until the target of the story gets deified or they become gods. This theory is named after mythologist Euhemerus, who states that Greek gods were created this way.
The second theory is allegory. When you hear someone say that is allegoric, this is the theory they are referencing. An example of this theory is Apollo, who represents the sun, or Poseidon, who represents the water, and so on. Also, this can begin as allegories for philosophical and even spiritual ideas. For instance, Athena represents wise judgment, Aphrodite is for romantic desire, and so on. Friedrich Max Müller, who is a comparative philologist and Orientalist of German descent, supported an allegorical theory of myth. He believed the allegoric myths were simply descriptions of nature that over time were taken literally.
Personification is our third theory. This one is similar to the previous because again, you get gods, the air, fire, etc. These figure out simple ideas that manifest themselves from the gods. How does mere objects or events, these magical events, personal gods, which eventually they rise to the myth.
Ritualism, as I'm sure you can understand, is a myth tied to ritual. William Robertson Smith, who passed in 1894 in Cambridge, England, was a minister of religion and a theologian, and is known for his studies on the religion of the Semites. He argues that people began performing rituals for reasons not related to a myth. These people over time forgot the original reason for the ritual, but accounted for it by inventing a myth and claiming the ritual commemorates the events in the myth.
Similarly, James George Frazer, author of The Golden Bough, which is a book on the comparative study of mythology and religion, argued that humans used to believe in magical rituals, a practice many still undertake today. But they began to lose faith in magic and started to invent myths about gods. They reinterpreted their rituals, intending to appease the gods.
Functionalism, which I believe is the current working theory of our present God, going all the way back to the Romans, which we'll explore in another episode, is argued by many that these myths function to form and shape society and social behaviors. Mircea Eliade, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, argued that myths may provide a religious experience and is already stated to establish models for behavior. By participating in such myths, it allows members of traditional societies to detach themselves from the here and now, and they can return to the mythical age and come closer to the divine. Greek philosopher Plato condemned mythical beliefs or stories because he believed that the uneducated might take the stories of gods and heroes literally. It seems obvious to me that either no one took him seriously, which considering he was very much an intellectualist, is unlikely, or those in power decided that is exactly what they wanted: control societies through ignorance. Moving on. Now, no one really knows the true mindset of the first people to begin creating gods and or deities, but archaeologists have uncovered many artifacts showing the evolution of these myths over time, where seemingly all or many of the writers or creators of such myths were clearly borrowing from the previous cultures. We now are going to begin exploring some of these ancient myths and attempt to put the pieces together while the evolution unfolds. The Sumerian flood story, also known as the Sumerian creation myth, the Sumerian deluge myth, is the oldest known Mesopotamian text telling the tale of the Great Flood. This work would also appear in the Atra-Hasis tale, thought to be from the 17th or 18th century BCE, in the well-known Epic of Gilgamesh, circa 2150 to 1400 BCE. The Sumerian flood story, also known as the Genesis, considered significantly older than Atra-Hasis tale, and is believed to have been passed off far before its writings orally, composed circa 2300 BCE, while the Epic of Gilgamesh, tablet 11, which also speaks of the Great Flood, is thought to have been older than that. So why am I mentioning these three tales? To answer, this is to show you, before I begin to try and offer the elusive influence from the past cultures in the Adam and Eve story, that goes back as far as we now know, of scribes and others creating and or simply telling these tales, obviously have in many cases stolen or at the very least borrowed from other earlier cultures to create their own myths. As a short note on reality, scholars and scientists believe through their studies that the flood stories are nothing more than telling of the times when the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers overflowed their banks, while believing that at one time this was extreme, which to them may have seemed the whole world flooded. We won't get into these tales too much now, but these stories tell the tales in a very similar fashion as what most are used to. One man is warned of the coming flood, told to build an ark or a boat, save the animals, etc., just like Noah, written hundreds of years or millennia later. I'll be doing a separate documentary on all of these tales at a later date, so look for that. The Archbishop James Ussher, 1581 to 1656, created the Ussher chronology, which was based primarily on the book of Genesis, while referencing other Bible narratives dating the creation of the world to October 22nd, 4004 BCE at 6 o'clock p.m. Wow. The Bible, according to him, was infallible and could be used in dating the age of the earth and any other aspect of human existence. Later, expeditions sent to Mesopotamia in hopes of finding evidence to support these claims actually revealed quite the opposite. Cuneiform tablets deciphered in the mid-19th century and later challenged the infallibility of the Bible, thought to be the oldest religion book after it was found that these tablets told the story of Noah's flood, but predating the Bible. Although many believe that this was just another reference to the same story, but from a different point of view. Nearly all cultures, including those outside of the biblical lands, have similar stories, and scholars believe, as do I, that this is simply due to trade between cultures, which allowed the stories to be told and adopted by other societies and are repeatedly told over time and generations. Now, I hope to have at the very least made you start thinking of how what you have been told since a child may not be true, and perhaps the tale of Adam and Eve, while more difficult to match so perfectly to older tales, could have, and most likely was borrowed from other cultures. While there are no other tales exactly like it, it is easy now to see how the tales these scribes and thinkers have already heard of could have influenced the story, like it has done to so many others. To get started on the parallels between ancient myths and the more recent Adam and Eve story, we will start with the Sumerians. An ancient land called Dilmun, which some believe is the modern land of Bahrain, although some also believe it is most likely on a mountain instead. For instance, Thorkild Jacobson's translation of the Area of Genesis mentions Mount Dilmun, which describes it as a partial mythical place, which is very far away and possibly unreachable to normal man. In Sumerian mythology, Dilmun is often depicted as a paradise land, where predators do not kill and pain and disease are absent. People do not age, so they may never die. This sounds very much like the Garden of Eden. After all, God said, "Do not eat from the tree of knowledge, else you shall surely die." This means, obviously, that if they did not do this, they would have lived in paradise forever. Can you imagine forever? No matter how beautiful the garden was. Forever? Moving on. Now, the stars of this play is Enki and Ninhursag. Dilmun is initially described as a paradise, but it lacks fresh water, so, in truth, it is a desert land with no life. The goddess Ninsekila, also known as Ninhursag, begs Enki to provide water for Dilmun. Enki then orders the sun god Utu to put forth water from the earth's underground sources, and Dilmun goes from desert to a paradise full of lush vegetation. Now, to move along with the story, which contains several other parts, Enki, out of curiosity, eats 8 plants from the Garden of Dilmun, which can be paralleled with Eve eating the forbidden fruit. The goddess Ninhursag considers this as a mortal sin, so she causes 8, one for each plant, of Enki's body parts to suffer, which one being his rib. Yes, Enki is a male, who now is on the brink of death. Enlil feels bad for Enki apparently and persuades Ninhursag to relent, causing various other deities to come and heal Enki's body parts. The one who heals Enki's rib is a goddess Ninti, whose name means Lady of the Rib, and the lady who makes live. Sounds a bit like Eve, who is the mother of all living in Genesis 3:20, yes? There are fairly obvious parallels here early on in our evolution, yet most scholars believe that the intertextual criteria are not strongly met. But the possibilities are clear that this story could have influenced the creators of the Adam and Eve story. It could appear that the gods and goddesses of the Sumerian story of Dilmun could have simply been recast into Adam and Eve. We have the rib mentioned and the forbidden plant or fruit which caused the god or goddesses to get upset with the apparent disobedience. While not an exact copy of the story of Adam and Eve, it should be clear how easily this could be used as a foundation for the story along with others, which we'll be investigating next. Now, we're going to explore the Atra-Hasis epic, which relates to the Atra-Genesis in many ways, but is a Babylonian story. This is not surprising due to the fact that they both originate from ancient Mesopotamia. Before we continue, I must show you that while ancient Mesopotamia seems like it should be a huge area, which pretty much covers the land between and around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, it is actually a very small area. Ancient Mesopotamia covered an area that was approximately 300 miles long and 150 miles wide, which totals about 45,000 square miles. This region included parts of modern-day Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, Turkey, and Iran. Texas in the United States, however, covers 268,596 square miles, and is approximately 3 times the size of Mesopotamia, Israel, and Jordan put together. This is the whole world to them. We have to add in the mentioned Egypt to get larger than Texas with 387,050 square miles, which by itself is larger. But the biblical stories don't travel through all of Egypt. Just an interesting point I thought you might enjoy. Now we get back to our story. The Atra-Hasis story begins after the creation of the world, but before the creation of human beings. The elder gods made the younger gods do all the work, such as digging in the beds for the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. The younger gods began to complain of all the hard work and asked the elders to relieve them. Enki, the god of wisdom, recommends the immortals create something like human beings to do the labor instead. One of the gods, known as Wi'ilu or Ilawe or Getstu, offers himself as a sacrifice for this endeavor and is killed. Nice guy, huh? The goddess Nintu, the mother goddess also known as Ninhursag, who we have already met in the Sumerian story along with Enki, takes his blood and flesh and his intelligence, adds them to clay to form 7 male and 7 female humans. At first, the gods enjoyed their leisure as the humans tilled the earth, etc., but over time, they grew too many and became too noisy. Enlil decides to, after sending plagues, drought, etc., which was thwarted by Enki, to lower the population instead by creating a great flood. Sound familiar? Enki promises to not interfere with the flood, although Enki takes pity on his servant Atra-Hasis and warns him of the coming flood and tells him to build an ark and to keep 2 of every kind of animal within. Now Enki promised to not interfere, so instead of talking directly to Atra-Hasis, he speaks to a wall where Atra-Hasis is on the other side and will surely hear him. Atra-Hasis does as he is commanded and the flood begins. It is easy to see how this story of the flood is the same or similar as the Sumerian one, which I failed to mention, but is not the focus of this documentary anyway, and why I showed you how small of an area Mesopotamia was. Naturally, these stories would be retold and easily repeated due to a small population. So here we have humans being created out of clay, but also requiring blood. In the Adam and Eve story, God creates man from dust, but instead of using blood, he blows his breath into Adam and brings him to life. This shows man can be created out of clay or dirt, but requires some essence of a god to do so. Also, we have the humans placed to do the work for the gods in this story, where in the Garden of Eden, Adam was created to keep the garden, work, and take care of it, also to name all the animals for his god. So, we have 4, while still elusive parallels to the Adam and Eve story. The Sumerians, we have the rib and the forbidden fruit or plants. We have the goddess Ninti, who can surely be compared to Eve being the one who makes live, while Eve is the mother of all living. We also have Dilmun, which seemingly is very much like the Garden of Eden, where people will never die. We have the creation of man out of some kind of dirt, who are made to serve the gods or God in Adam and Eve. And the evolution continues.